So, what's trending? Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio.
You're listening to Trending with Timmerie here on Relevant Radio during our weekly marriage hour. Joining me in just a little bit will be my husband, Gabriel. It is always so much fun to have him on, especially during our marriage hour. We're going to be talking about what is manhood in light of fatherhood, in light of being a husband, especially after having watched a TED Talk that the actor Justin Luis Baldoni gave. He's an American actor, director, and filmmaker, on why I'm done trying to be man enough. It led to a fascinating conversation, and I wanted to have that here with you during our weekly marriage hour. Also coming up, we'll continue our series on the Rosary, and we'll look to the joyful mysteries of the presentation of our Lord in the temple and the finding of Jesus in the temple. I think this actually has a lot to say as well about marriage. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie during our weekly marriage hour. We had a number of questions come in that I want to unpack today on the show, having to do with everything from natural family planning to experiencing cheating in your marriage, to also the topic of in-law relationships. I received a couple questions over the last week since we did the segment on in-law relationships, and I want to touch on boundaries for just a moment. A question came in surrounding how do you establish boundaries? What's kind of a good guideline for getting there? And I think a good starting point is there's an incredible book that I read some years ago, and it's called Boundaries by Dr. John Townsend and Dr. Henry Cloud. Fantastic book. You can listen to it on Audible or read it as well. But I think it provides a lot of helpful resources for couples in discovering them. But I recently heard a story from a friend of mine where mother-in-law wanted to come and visit from out of town. Now, the mother-in-law has an extremely flexible schedule. She could really travel in many ways when she pleases. Now, she basically gave the dates to the daughter-in-law and son as to when she was going to be coming to visit, to which her daughter-in-law and son responded, "Well, we won't be in town. You're welcome to come to the area, but we won't be here." And the response received from the mother-in-law wasn't too pleasing. She basically told her daughter-in-law off about how unwelcoming and hospitable they were being because they weren't going to be there when she planned her visit, without asking them if they would be there, without asking if it was a good time even, or even planning the trip itself. And so when she was offered other dates to come and visit when they would be in town, she wouldn't even discuss the other dates. And finally, my friend basically said, "I think it's not a good time for you to come and visit." Why? Well, I was actually really impressed. And here's why. Not the fact that there wasn't going to be a joy-filled interaction with a grandma and grandkids and son and daughter-in-law, mother-in-law. I think that the big picture here is that there were a lack of boundaries being respected. And finally, my friend and her spouse had to say, you know what? This just isn't a good time. If you can't respect that we're going to be out of town when you want to come visit, we're happy to give you other dates, and you're clearly putting up too big of a deal about this, well, this just isn't a good time for you to come and visit right now. And I think this is important for a couple of reasons. One, I think of helping other people to understand their consequences at times. Not that we should be punishing in-laws for their behavior, but we also have to engage in self-preservation, the preservation of our marriages. We have to also reject manipulation and work to keep a marriage healthy in the face of outside influences. And this could be influences of the world, or even influences of our own family, or even influences of our own addictions that impact marriage or bad habits. We have to work on finding consequences for ourselves, boundaries, and a means of building up a culture of marriage and having a healthy relationship and dynamic with other people. I share this story because the question had to do with how do you find those boundaries within marriage. I think all of it comes back to understanding a very, very important verse from the beginning of marriage that we hear in Genesis chapter 2, right after God created Adam and Eve. He said, "Therefore, a man leaves father and mother and cleaves to his wife, and they become one flesh. What is significant about this? This isn't just talking about intimacy. This is talking about a union of mind, of body, of soul, of spirit, where the couple's on the same side. They're on the same team, and they're working to build up a holy marriage, striving for heaven, but also working to build up the lives of their children, healthy relationships with other people. And they need to be unified in these challenging dynamics. And so I think this provided a really good example of finally saying, you know what? This just isn't a good time for you to visit. Why? Because you're not respecting the fact that we need to be able to have a conversation, that the marriage, the fact that we're not going to be in town, all of these, and we're offering you other times, needs to be respected. And we can't stand by, especially within our marriages, with a culture that wants to push us in a different direction, make us live in a certain way, or even be manipulated by particular people. I thought this was a really good example, again, for us to ponder as we're talking about in-law relationships over the last couple of weeks here on Trending during our marriage hour. Joining me in just a little bit will be my husband, Gabriel. I want to also answer a couple of other questions that came through on Instagram. This one's from Maria on Instagram. Where can a husband get help for cheating? This is a great question. And Maria, I'm really sorry if this is your experience. Know of my prayers and thoughts for you and your spouse. Betrayal trauma is horrible, whether it's in the form of physical cheating, emotional cheating, pornography, all of those challenges that we're seeing facing marriages today. One resource for you as a spouse, any spouses out there who have experienced betrayal trauma, is a Bloom for Catholic Women. That's BLOOM for CatholicWomen.com. I'll post a link in the show notes as well as on social media if you'd like to check that out or give it as a resource to someone you know. Another great resource for marriages, even in the face of difficult circumstances such as cheating and infidelity, is Retrovi. It's actually a retreat and encounter for Catholic couples to go to. You can find them at helpourmarriage.org. That's helpourmarriage.org. A lot of couples who were on the brink of divorce, who are facing infidelity, financial crises, pornography addiction, other addictions, have gone to Help Our Marriage Retrovi retreats and have found a path to beginning in healing for the marriage, even when on the brink of divorce. And if you still need help, I want to encourage you to read Layla Miller's book, Impossible Marriages Redeemed. And it tells the story of dozens of marriages that were on the brink of divorce, but saved because of fidelity to the church's teaching, fidelity to our spouses, and seeking out true healing and forgiveness within marriages. Another excellent resource, there's CatholicTherapist.com if your spouse is willing to go to therapy. And another resource I know, in light of sometimes a lack of face-to-face resources for therapy and other things today, there's holyfamilycounseling.org. Holy Family Counseling offers teletherapy, and they do work in particular focusing on marriage. So be sure to check out those resources. I'll include a link to them in the show notes for today. But Maria, know of my prayers, and if you too are experiencing infidelity within your marriage or suspect it, know that there's help and resources. And I want to encourage therapy, especially for the spouse who has been betrayed. It can be incredibly helpful in healing and working through the challenges, as we can't control what our spouses do. We can pray for them. We can set a good example, but we can control how we respond and react and how we work toward a healthy form of fidelity and having good boundaries within the midst of infidelity within our marriages. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie here on Relevant Radio. Another question came in from Mrs. Rojas on Instagram. She said, when is it morally acceptable to practice natural family planning, and when should we not? This is an excellent question because there's a lot of confusion about natural family planning, and there's often this attitude that natural family planning, also known as NFP, is just Catholic birth control. Now, if you don't know what NFP, natural family planning, is, well, that is where you understand through the incredible medical sciences when a woman's body is fertile and infertile. And you can appeal to the naturally infertile days of a woman's cycle, which is actually a vast majority of the month, to engage in intimacy, sexual intimacy, and there would be no child that would result from it. Now, this can be known by not just rhythm method, as some people refer to in counting, but everything from monitoring mucuses, temperature, body temperature, to also the data of looking at your bodily pattern and putting all of that scientific data together and what's referred to as NAPRO tracking or fertility care practitioner tracking. And you can have a pretty good understanding of that window of intimacy that could occur when a child would not result. Now, that being said, is it right for a couple to always turn to infertile periods in order to engage in intimacy, therefore knowing that you would not bring about a new life? No. NFP is incredibly effective, even more effective than hormonal contraception, among other types of so-called burial methods, which NFP is not. It's actually engaging in what's known as abstinence, refraining from intimacy. It requires self-control. It requires honoring and respecting the bodies of your spouses and finding other ways to encourage intimacy as well, and conversation, and spending quality time together. That said, we have the teaching of St. Pope Paul VI in Humanae Vitae that really helps to guide Christian spouses through how to understand and respect fertility. And a line that's in there that's very important that touches on this, having to do with everything from the spacing out of children or waiting to have more children for an indefinite period of time, says that this may occur for serious reasons and with a due respect to moral precepts, where a couple may decide not to have additional children for either a certain or an indefinite period of time. Notice, a certain period of time agreed upon, or an indefinite. That is not an indefinite, not a definite. And I think that's important, that we're not saying, okay, we're definitely no longer having any more kids. That's actually not accepted in the church's teaching. It has to be an indefinite amount of time, or a time decided upon for, as Humanae Vitae, Pope St. Paul VI says, for serious reasons and with due respect to the moral precepts. Well, what are the moral precepts having to do with a marriage and family life? Well, we're called to, in every act of intimacy between Christian spouses, that we have two dimensions, that we're always open to life, and that we're also unitive in our engagements, which is part of the reason why there's a problem with all forms of barrier methods and hormonal contraception. It prevents life and prevents a union. And so when we're resorting, if you find through prayerful discernment that it is necessary to have recourse to those infertile times to perhaps space out children, or for serious health reasons, that you've discerned that, it's important to recognize natural family planning is not Catholic birth control. It's not meant to be like, well, I want to space all my kids out every 2 years. It's not supposed to be like, well, I'm saving up for a new car, a bigger house. I just don't want another kid right now. I want to travel. Those aren't serious reasons. And I think that that's important for us to recognize that the church is offering us respect for the body through self-control and chastity, marital chastity, and abstinence, a means, if necessary, to wait to have another child. And I think that that's very important that we understand. And so the question, when is it morally acceptable to practice natural family planning? This is meant to be discerned between the spouses via conversation and prayer, and maybe even offering and inviting spiritual guidance. But I think one of the best ways to do that is to, one, read as a couple Humanae Vitae. For some reason, we don't read this incredible teaching of the church that will help us in navigating challenging circumstances surrounding our fertility. But also, I want to encourage you that natural family planning can still be used for knowledge of a woman's body and health and reproductive system, as well as natural family planning can also be used to help couples in achieving pregnancy, to have a baby when maybe they were having a hard time conceiving. I know this is something that my husband and I turned to with natural family planning because of some of my autoimmune diseases. We needed additional help with our incredible NAPRO technology and natural family planning. So, great question, Mrs. Rojas. I'll be praying for you and your spouse as you discern this, and all couples as they work through, navigate a generous and open heart to our Lord and His timing. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie here on Relevant Radio. Coming up will be my husband, Gabriel, joining me for a conversation having to do with the topic of what is masculinity. I'll be right back during our weekly marriage hour. Catholic Order of Foresters is proud to sponsor the Relevant Radio studio line. For information about employment opportunities and flexible premium life insurance plans, visit relevantradio.com/Forrester.
Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
You're joining us during our weekly marriage hour here on Trending, and it's always a joy for me to have my husband, Gabriel, across from me here in our studio to talk about marriage, but specifically today, what is manhood? I think it's an important topic. I was recently sent a TED Talk that actor, director, and filmmaker Justin Luis Baldoni actually gave, and the title of it was Why I'm Done Trying to Be Man Enough. Now, the talk itself addressed how he's played all of these roles oozing with machismo, courage, power, dominance. He said, I've been pretending to be a man I'm not my entire life. He actually talked about how in his real life, he tried to imitate and ooze these same qualities that he's played and acted on the screen. And he talked about how he was taught things such as he was supposed to be tough when he was hurting, and how he's tired and done trying to be a man enough for everyone all the time. He's tired of being told to be a certain way, and he wanted to be accepted and liked, which is, according to him, why he actually lived the way he lived. And he also talked about how he learned that he was to reject the feminine within and accept the masculine. He was taught that girls are weak and men are strong, and he said this is wrong to have been communicated. He said this is toxic and has to end. So he said that he had to take a real look at himself, and he thinks the world really has to take a look at the generations of view of masculinity and the script that men have been handed about what it means to be a man, and being, according to him, man enough. He shared how the first script he ever came by actually came from his father, and how his father taught him to be kind, loving, nurturing, and sensitive. Didn't necessarily teach him how to play, or should I say work with his hands. And how he blamed his father for years for, according to him, making him soft, and therefore that he was bullied. And he talked about how just because his father wasn't traditionally masculine didn't mean that he didn't pass on essentially the masculine traits, and that Justin, the actor Justin Luis Baldoni, later didn't grow to appreciate these. So joining me now is my husband, Gabriel. I want to unpack this whole idea because I think it's important. There's a lot that Justin ended up saying, this American actor, about being a man. And I want to come first to what is manhood? I mean, as a man, what do you look at this as? And what do you think about what Justin had to say?
You know, I'd like to start the conversation off by talking about Thomas Aquinas and his definition of what perseverance is. Thomas Aquinas said that perseverance is pushing yourself even though your feelings tell you otherwise, or living that strenuous life and pushing through even though it's uncomfortable. It's more of this disregarding the comfort and embracing the discomfort. That's essentially what perseverance is to Thomas Aquinas. That requires a high level of self-sacrifice. And I think that's what really should give all men direction. Something I'm even struggling with today. I think all men will always struggle with this, but as long as we know that if we have a sense of perseverance, or if we can pray to God for the graces to increase our virtue and perseverance, that will give us a clear direction as to how I can be self-sacrificial. And I think that's truly what a man must be. You saw that in St. Joseph. You saw that in Jesus. You saw that in all the apostles. You see it in all martyrs, essentially.
Yeah. It's the Christian witness seen universally as Christians, not just of men. Now, following the script from this TED Talk from actor Justin Luis Baldoni, he might argue, well, that's what I'm saying, that you're supposed to do the uncomfortable, because he ends up going on in his TED Talk to discuss how, he needed to embrace more of his emotions. He needed to work on sharing his emotions. And he even actually mentions how for some men, it's very, very difficult, that the idea of sharing your sensitive side is looked at as not man enough. So he might argue, well, I am, because I'm sharing a side of myself that's softer and it's not as comfortable for me.
Yeah, it is important to share your emotions and your feelings, but it isn't, it's immodest to do it all the time or in front of anybody, or to do it to somebody who isn't your wife.
Or a close family member who is proper to discuss that with, given your state in life.
Yeah, exactly. If you're a single guy and, if there's one person that you can trust, you should be able to open up to that one person. I don't think it's manly, and I think using the word manly here is correct. I don't think it's manly to be emotional and to, be self-expressive in public like that of what would be more feminine.
So what we're talking about, I think a good example that you're reaching for, even this culture, I actually saw a man the other day, Gabriel. I don't know if you were at the grocery store with me. I think you were ahead of me, and I was glad you didn't see it. This man in like a male romper, traditionally a girl's outfit, one piece. And I mean, you don't want to be mean, but at the same time, get in touch with your feminine side, wear anything. And what we're talking about are almost things that some people might argue, well, those are just stereotypes, women's clothing, etc. Or you could give the example of kind of this oversharing of men on social media at times. And some people might say, well, at least they felt comfortable expressing themselves. Yeah, but the problem is that they weren't expressing themselves to the right person. And I think that there are a lot of examples of this, and even as simple as, I'll never forget, some time ago, I was with a couple of men, and they were kind of like right next to me, and it was always kind of that awkward moment of like, do I just like take 2 steps forward ahead of them and open the door myself, or do I linger back and allow the man to open? And it was crazy to me. I lingered back in that instance, and the guy made fun of me. Literally made fun of me. And I'm using this because I think that there's this weakness within sometimes our masculine culture that, well, you should just do it yourself. You shouldn't be dependent on me. And, I should be able to wear whatever I want. Who cares if it's women's clothing? All of these things that, some people might say are leading men to be weak or effeminate.
There's this push, and we've heard it throughout social media, the news, of this patriarchal structure, this systematic patriarchal structure that is this war on women, where in reality, men just have this instinct to lead. They have this instinct to take care and to protect. Is this patriarchal? Yes.
Quickly define patriarchy, it means to be the male head of your home.
Yes. It is. Yes, exactly. To be the spiritual leader of your home. This is correct. And when we see this ideology pushing against this virtuous act, I mean, it's evil. So when you see a man that is basically this man's mentality of happy wife, happy life, do what she wants, I will be docile, I will play the stupid guy, like, for example, the show Modern Family is a perfect example of how not to be. Now, yes, it's a funny show, of course, but it's a perfect example of a man completely disregarding his patriarchy and acting stupid and just having his wife take control of everything.
I've never seen the show, but I think that we've seen images and photos from that show where I've gone, oh, wow, you can see even just the way the main character is portrayed in the show, there is this sense of just like throwing and shirking responsibility. And I think ultimately that's what we're talking about. When you mentioned what is manhood, you talked about self-sacrifice and perseverance. According to St. Thomas Aquinas' definition, having to do with perseverance. And I think that's really, really important, I think, to ponder. But I think one of the challenges is that men are struggling to discover over this based on their state in life. You have some men who are
Yes.
married, some men who are married without kids or with kids, or who are single, prolonged into their adult years or living that young adult life, and they don't quite know where they fit in.
Yeah, this is about, like you just said, your state in life. So if you're a single guy and you don't know what your future looks like, you don't really have a solid plan, you feel lonely or whatever, the direction is simple. It's so important to create a mission. I know that I've said this before on the show, and it's important to bring it up again. Every man must have a mission regardless of their state in life. Every man must pray for the virtue of perseverance regardless of their state in life. Every man has the opportunity to self-sacrifice. Now, you can be single, you can be alone, you can still be self-sacrificial for your future. You can still be self-sacrificial for Our Lady. You can still be self-sacrificial in other capacities for your friends, for your neighbors. Everything comes back to the spiritual authority of every man. When I married you on the altar in front of our families, there was a moment of transition there from your father who had spiritual authority over you, and he passed that to me through the grace of God. I now am the patriarch of this family. And that's a really, really big deal, because what we're seeing in our culture is this complete disregard of spirituality and the physical world. I just want to make my wife happy, so I'll do whatever she wants. That is so terrible. That's practically a sin, because you're destroying the fabric of what a family is supposed to be.
So then what's the right perspective to have instead of a happy wife, happy life? Because I imagine there are a lot of people saying, well, it's worked well for me, or women who are saying my husband's so good to me. So what's the proper perspective if you're saying don't have an attitude of happy wife, happy life?
Live an ascetical life. And that's important, especially through marriage and in the family. Be a virtuous family. A virtuous husband means a virtuous wife. And if a wife can be virtuous, the children can be virtuous. And then that equates a happy life.
Would you say, when we're talking about what it means to be a man and having this attitude with a marriage of happy wife, happy life, that attitude is kind of like, just get me by. Let me just please this person, and that is what will allow me to be happy and not harassed, and for her to be contented and happy as well and feel good about herself, rather than this idea of masculinity that you propose of self-sacrifice and perseverance, where we understand this has to do with a man's responsibilities, his duties in life, and fulfilling his duties.
Well, that's a good question, but let me answer it by asking the question on you. How would you feel, because we're married, we have a kid, how would you feel if I was docile and I just did what you wanted every single moment of our life, and I took care of essentially nothing, and I didn't do anything unless you told me to do something? How would you feel?
You poor thing, you would be harassed by me.
Yeah.
I mean, it would turn into a mess.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, I could just see it, especially because I'm more type A. I like things done. I want to make sure, I like hard workers. And, I mean, you already get enough crap from me as is. But could you imagine if your attitude was just like, I'll just wait for my wife to do it? Oh, my gosh. It would lead to World War II, World War III in our house. Yeah,
exactly. Wouldn't you feel better if you lived in a house with some direction where you actually, my husband actually has direction. He knows what he's doing. I don't have to worry about those things. Doesn't that causes less stress for you, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. Well, I want to come back to something you said earlier, and that is, and if you're just joining us, you're listening to Trending with Timmerie. I'm Timmerie here on Relevant Radio, and this is my husband, Gabriel, joining me today during a weekly marriage hour. You mentioned just a little bit ago the example of marriage when, the husband receives his bride from his soon-to-be father-in-law at the altar. That is a moment of a passing over of authority over the family, over the new bride. And I think that a lot of women, even listening now, are probably cringing at this idea of men as the authority, the head of the family. But when we talk about authority isn't control. Authority is responsibility.
Right.
And I think that that's the confusion, and why so many radical feminists object to what they hear when they hear the word patriarchy. One, they can't define it, but two, they think authority, patriarchy has to do with control rather than loving self-sacrifice due to the responsibility that's there.
Yeah.
Let's speak briefly, and I know here, I think this is important. Actor Justin Luis Baldoni ended up concluding in his talk, and there's so much to unpack in the TED Talk that he gave. He talks about how really he's thankful for his father teaching him to use his heart more than his hands. And I think that a lot of what Baldoni had to say in his TED Talk, there were a lot of truths to it. I think he kind of goes off in the wrong direction sometimes and maybe overly emphasizes the emotional life of a man and disregards the importance of being able to physically protect. What are your thoughts in that approach where he's appreciative of his father for teaching him to use more of his heart, which is a good thing, but then, he kind of disregards this idea of being able to work with and use his hands?
You can still be virtuous and have soft hands. Okay, so let me dive into this a little bit. What does it mean to have soft hands? It basically means you have essentially a white collar life. You go to work with a suit on, the tie. I go to work every day with a tie. I have a desk job. Project management. That doesn't require me to use my hands physically. What is important is it's good, not essential, but it's good to have a sense of self-reliance. It's good for a man to have a sense of independence and say, no, I can do that myself, or I can carve that myself, or I can change the oil myself, or I should cut the grass myself, or I should clean the house, or I should do the dishes myself. Those are things that allow men to be protectors, to be providers, but also, like I just said, self-reliant. That's a strong key indicator that shows that you're on a successful track towards being virtuous, independent, but also attaining the virtue of perseverance. When men are self-reliant, they're more in tune with themselves, they're more in tune with their emotions, they're more in tune with what they're lacking in life. And I think that it puts life into perspective when a man can say, I can do that myself. And it's not a level of pride. It's just understanding what our capabilities are.
And it's a capacity to provide a way to care for the family. And I think something that stood out over the last few years is a lot of women have been asked when they're dating someone, are you confident that the man you're dating, if push came to shove, could protect you in the worst possible circumstances, to provide a meal, to provide physical protection, and provide shelter when there was none of that accessible. No means of electricity, no help from other people. Let's say you're in the wilderness. And what happened is a lot of women who were dating people actually said no, they didn't have that confidence in the man they were dating. And I thought this was very significant because we're not just talking about you having to be, as actor Baldoni ends up saying, like kind of this machismo oozing, this tough guy mentality. It's that you have the capacity to do what is necessary to care for others. And I think that this is what brings us back to this whole idea of what is manhood. Let's bring this back for a moment to church teaching. I think that it's important to recognize that God created us in his image and likeness. And traditionally, when we talk about being created in God's image and likeness, we talk about the creation of Eve before Adam. And I don't mean physically before Adam, but in Genesis chapter 2, Adam's there as he's seeing the creation of Eve. And he has this moment of, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. You see, the tradition holds in this moment that we see our purpose. We see that we're meant to be a gift of self. I'm created to be for you and you for me. And he sees this moment of sacrificial love that's understood in the garden. This is seen by the death of Christ on the cross and in the saints who have sacrificed their lives literally to the point of martyrdom or through ongoing witnesses of sacrificial love for others. All of this is significant, and I think is summarized in many ways in a statement from the Magisterium, our Catholic Church, at the Pastoral Constitution, Gaudium et Spes, where when commenting upon the creation of Adam and Eve in the image and likeness of God, says, this likeness reveals that man, who is the only creature on earth, which God willed for itself, cannot fully find himself except through a sincere gift of himself. So in other words, what this teaching from the church is saying, Gaudium et Spes, is that man will never discover himself as a creature with his purpose unless he makes a sincere gift of self.
100%. And let me leave with this. We cannot separate our spiritual life and our physical life. It's all one. We cannot separate our manhood to our patriarchy. It's all one. We cannot stop striving for virtue. It's part of who we are as men, and it's in our mission to be self-sacrificial. And I think by understanding those core components, we can pursue that strenuous life to provide and to protect and also attain virtue.
That's my husband Gabriel here on Trending with Timmerie. We'll be right back during our weekly marriage hour.
So, what's trending? Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
Join Relevant Radio Saturday, that's 11 a.m. Central, as we broadcast the Apparition Anniversary Mass from the Shrine of Our Lady of Good Help, the only approved Marian apparition site in the United States. This annual Mass commemorates when Our Lady appeared in October 1859, identifying herself as the Queen of Heaven, who prays for the conversion of sinners. Bishop David Ricken, the Bishop of Green Bay, will be the celebrant if you normally listen or watch the daily Mass at noon Central here on Relevant Radio. Please be sure to note that this special broadcast of the Apparition Anniversary Mass is at 11 a.m. Central on Saturday, and it will replace our regular noon Central Mass. You can listen on your local Relevant Radio station or watch online at relevantradio.com or through the Relevant Radio app. You're with us here during our weekly marriage hour, and we're going to turn our focus to the joyful mysteries as we're working through our Rosary series, encouraging you to pray with us for an end to abortion in the month of the Rosary, to pray for our Supreme Court justices, for the overturning of Roe versus Wade, and for an outpouring of support for expectant mothers as well. I want to walk through the joyful mysteries of the presentation of our Lord, as well as the finding of Jesus in the temple. Now, the presentation of our Lord holds a special place of significance for me because my husband and I were actually married on the Feast of the Presentation. The Feast of the Presentation was the chosen feast day, in part because this feast, this story of the Blessed Virgin Mary and Joseph presenting their babe child, and also known in the tradition of the church as the purification of Mary, that is after 40 days after the blood and the gruesomeness and the recovery necessary after having a child. And the Jewish religion, what was known is that it was believed that you were considered unclean, and so you had to wait those 40 days before presenting yourself for the purification in the temple, and there was a whole ceremony. And there's something significant about that because it's a giving of yourself in the giving of your child and the presenting of yourself for the first time in the temple as a mother. As a mother, I mean, that is so powerful. Yes, you've been a mother carrying your child, but your child is beheld in your arms. This is so significant. Now, my husband and I were married on this feast day, and everyone likes to go, February 2nd, it's Groundhog's Day. No, it's the feast day of the presentation, okay? So that's when we celebrate this great feast day. Now, the presentation is significant for a number of reasons. I think first and foremost for me, it symbolizes the sacrifice of the Christ child that St. Joseph and the Blessed Virgin Mary offered. We read that they offer in Luke chapter 2 a pair of turtle doves or 2 young pigeons. They're giving their child as a means of salvation for the world. Do they fully know the significance? Perhaps not. But what they show is that we too are called to give of ourselves, our motherhood, our fatherhood, whatever state of life we're in, to give of our children, to give of the work and fruit of our hands. This is the Christian witness that we lay down on the altar, just as St. Joseph and the Blessed Virgin Mary laid down and gave their child at the presentation of Christ in the temple. To present ourselves as a living sacrifice, holy and without blemish. that we're in a state of grace. Why is this significant? Well, think of this in terms of the presentation of the gifts at Mass. When the procession occurs of all the money that we have given and donated in the collection basket, and the bread and wine and water that will be transformed into the body and blood of our Lord Jesus Christ by the priest acting in persona Christi, taking on the sacrifice of Christ, uniting himself to the sacrifice of Christ before the Father, that this is how the transformation, the transubstantiation into the body and blood of Christ occurs. It occurs with our sacrifice that we too offer up and lay down. Now, it was really neat when my baby girl was born and we went for her baptism. We baptized her 2 weeks exactly after her birth. It was very important to me that we baptized her right away. I think that's kind of a travesty that we allow so much time to go on in today's world between the birth of a child and their baptism for the salvation of their soul, being united to Christ, the removal of that original sin. That's so important. Why would we wait? We do all these other life-saving things and we care for the cleanliness of our children. Why not for their souls as well? And so my husband is a Maronite Catholic, a Lebanese Catholic. And so in the Maronite rite, one of the incredible things that's still done following in the tradition of the presentation of the Christ child in the temple is that the first time a baby goes into the church, the very first time, which was for my baby girl, this was the first time, for the Mass, before Mass, we had Mass before the baptism, my husband and I presented our baby girl to the priest before all the congregation. We handed her over to the priest, and the priest processed up to the altar. He ascended the stairs, and he sang a hymn as he walked around the altar, and he bowed at every side of the altar, all 4 sides of the altar, and he placed her on the altar. This little baby, she was there in her pure white baptismal outfit, wrapped in a white garment, and literally set on the altar, presented to be given to God. It was such a powerful moment as a parent, and to see that, Lord, this child is not mine, this child is yours. And for us to let go of our plans, our desires, of our control, of our ownership of things in life, the presentation of the gifts at Sunday Mass, at daily Mass, became all the more powerful to me when I saw this presentation occur of my baby there at church. This is the presentation of Christ, and it's a tradition, again, that's still held in the Maronite rite of Catholicism that we did. This is all significant because we have to work when we're praying through our rosary, when we're at Mass and we're thinking that, this is a great time to go to the bathroom, the collection basket's being passed around, the gifts are being taken up to the altar, we seemingly maybe think that we don't miss that much. This is the moment where we lay it all down. Our hopes, our dreams, our failures, our sin, and we go, Lord, take everything I have, everything I am, even in this instance, my own child. And for St. Joseph and the Blessed Virgin Mary, literally they gave their child. This is the significance of the presentation of Christ in the temple. And we didn't even unpack the story of Simeon and Anna, who we encounter in the Gospel according to Luke chapter 2, which is who St. Joseph, Our Lady, and the child Jesus meet in the temple. But I want to speak briefly a moment now about the finding of Jesus in the temple, because I won't be with you tomorrow. We'll have, I believe it's Patrick Connolly, or we also have Father Matthew Spencer, who will be subbing in, coming over the next week or so. I'll be back with you on Monday, though. We're going to unpack that last joyful mystery today, since I won't be here tomorrow. And we read in Luke chapter 2, starting right around verse 41, we read about how Joseph and Our Lady took their annual pilgrimage to Jerusalem for Passover. And when they were on their way back there with all their clan, with their family, they discovered that Jesus was missing. One probably thought that he was with the other, with the cousins, with the other family members. And lo and behold, that for 3 days and 3 nights, they're searching for the Christ child. And finally, they discover him in the temple all the way back at Jerusalem. Now, we read that After 3 days, they found him in the temple, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. And when his parents saw him, they were astonished. And his mother said to him, "Son, why have you treated us so? Behold, your father and I have been looking for you anxiously." And he said to them, "How is it that you sought me? Did you not know that I must be in my father's house?" We read that they did not understand the saying which he spoke to them. You see, Jesus established himself even knowingly. He didn't follow his mother and father back home after the pilgrimage to Jerusalem, because he was in the temple, as we read, teaching and actually asking questions as a little boy. Imagine St. Joseph and the Blessed Virgin Mary looking at their son, going, "You're just our child. What are you doing?" So we read anxiously, Our Lady says, "Why have you done this? Why have you treated us so?" But Jesus said, "Behold," he says, that, "How is it that you sought me? Did you not know that I must be in my Father's house?" Jesus is establishing that he is the teacher. He is the source of all. He provides everything. And it's a foreshadowing the 3 days and 3 nights that he will be in the tomb before his resurrection for something much greater. And this transition from his boyhood into essentially establishing his manhood in the finding of Jesus in the temple, he's establishing himself as God, as an authority, as someone who is responsible for souls, for the loving sacrifice and teaching and witness that Jesus himself gives. This is part of the power of pondering the mystery of the finding of Jesus in the temple. That it's not just the finding of the Jesus in the temple, it's the finding of God of the universe who transforms our life.